her head twisted beyond what was possible until her empty eyes locked onto mine. Her arms began to contort, bones cracking loudly as her body turned to face me. Her face was pale, her eyes completely black, and a grotesque smile appeared on her lips as if she was enjoying my fear. Today, on the channel Echoes of Shadows, you will hear 3 real stories from employees who witnessed the darkest side of psychiatric hospitals. Let me know in the comments where you're from and what your supernatural experience has been. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming stories. Thank you very much. Story 1. The Hall of the Condemned.
My name is James and I live in Philadelphia. I've been working as a night watchman at a psychiatric hospital for almost 3 years now. The place is old, known for the number of patients that have come through and for the strange stories that float around among the staff. I was never one to believe in that stuff. Always figured it was just people trying to scare the new guys. But that night, everything changed. It was a Thursday, my shift started at 10 p.m. and went until morning. The hospital was quiet, the kind of silence that gets under your skin. I was making my rounds through the dark hallways, flashlight in hand, when my radio started making strange noises, like someone was trying to speak, but all I could hear was static. I figured it was a signal issue, so I ignored it and kept walking. I passed through corridor B, where the older wings are, the ones that rarely have patients anymore. That's when things got weird. The lights started flickering and the cold hit me like a brick. Not just any cold, this was the kind that makes your bones shiver. I kept walking, trying to stay calm, but then I saw her, a woman. She was standing a few feet ahead, facing away from me, wearing one of those old white hospital gowns. At first I thought she must have been a lost patient, so I called out to her, "Ma'am, are you okay? You can't be here. I'll take you back." She didn't respond. She just stood there shaking a little, like she was cold. I started to walk closer, but then the radio in my pocket started crackling again, this time with clearer voices, whispers. The woman stayed still. When I got within a couple of feet, she slowly turned her head, but only her head while her body stayed still. That's when I realized something was seriously wrong. Her neck twisted way past where it should have stopped, bending in an impossible way. Her skin was pale, her eyes wide, staring straight at me. I couldn't breathe. I tried to take a step back, but my legs felt like they were stuck in concrete. Then she started twisting her body, her limbs contorting, like her bones were breaking, bending in directions no human body could move. She began walking backward toward me, her head still facing forward, as if some invisible force was dragging her. I somehow snapped out of my frozen state and ran back to the monitoring room, my heart racing. I locked the door, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. The cameras in corridor B were glitching, only showing dark shapes moving around. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down, but then I heard it, a knock at the door. I looked through the small window, and in the hallway stood several figures, all contorting the same way the woman had, their bodies bent in unnatural directions, their necks twisted like rubber. And the worst part, they were all staring at me. Slowly they started knocking on the door, like they were toying with me, testing how much fear I could handle. Each knock echoed in the room. I grabbed my radio to call for help, but all I got was static. The knocking got louder, and the voices on the radio became clearer, louder. They were saying my name over and over, mocking me. I shut my eyes, hoping that if I didn't look, they'd go away. But when I opened them, one of the figures was right at the glass, its face twisted, eyes empty black holes. The door began shaking like it was going to break any second, and then, suddenly, it all stopped. The silence came back, just as quickly as it had left. I sat there frozen until the clock hit 6 a.m. and my shift was over. When the day staff arrived, I walked out without saying a word. I've never told anyone this before, but I know it wasn't a dream. I saw them, and I know they're still waiting.
Story 2. The Whisper of the North Wing.
My name is Mark, and I'm a nurse at a psychiatric hospital in rural Pennsylvania, in a small town called Hazleton. Working in a place like this has always had its challenges, but nothing could have prepared me for what I experienced on one October night. It was supposed to be just another quiet shift, or as quiet as it could get in a place like this. St. Mary's Psychiatric Hospital is old, built in the late 1950s, with dark hallways and walls that seem to close in on you. It's always been a little creepy, but I had gotten used to it, until that night. It was around 2 a.m., and the hospital was silent, with most of the patients sedated. Only the occasional distant screams from someone in crisis broke the quiet, but that was routine. I was in the control room, checking the camera monitors. Everything seemed normal until the camera for the north wing started glitching. That part of the hospital, for those who don't know, is the oldest, and they say several patients died under mysterious circumstances there many years ago. When the image came back, I saw something that didn't make sense. There was a woman standing at the end of the hallway, wearing a hospital gown, staring at the wall. The strangest part? The north wing was completely decommissioned. No patients should have been there. I grabbed my flashlight and decided to check it out. I walked down the cold, echoing halls. When I got to the wing, I felt an overwhelming chill, like the air was heavier, denser. The lights were flickering like they were malfunctioning, but I knew they'd been checked recently. As I approached the end of the hallway, I saw her. She was exactly as I'd seen on the camera, standing with her back to me, facing the wall. "Ma'am, you can't be here. Let's get you back to your ward, okay?" My voice came out shaky, and I was trying hard not to show the panic rising inside me. She didn't move. I kept getting closer, and that's when I smelled it. A strong, foul odor, like something rotten. When I got within a few feet of her, she began to murmur. It was a low, disturbing sound, almost like she was praying in a language I didn't recognize. Suddenly, she began to turn her head, slowly, very slowly. But it wasn't a normal turn. Her head twisted far beyond what was possible until her empty eyes locked onto mine. I froze. Her arms started to contort, the sound of bones cracking loudly, while her body twisted to face me. Her skin was pale, her eyes completely black, and a grotesque smile crept across her face, as if she was enjoying my fear. I tried to step back, but she lunged forward in an inhuman way, gliding down the hall like a shadow. I fell to the floor, my flashlight spinning away, and when I turned to look, it got even worse. There were more figures in the hallway now, patients who should have been sleeping in their beds, but somehow they were there, twisting and bending as if their bones were breaking from the inside out. They crawled along the floor making guttural noises, their eyes just as empty as the woman's. All of them were coming toward me. I scrambled to my feet and ran, my heart pounding, but the hallway felt endless. The side doors began slamming shut by themselves, as if something or someone inside was trying to get out. With every slam, I felt like I was being pulled closer to them. When I finally reached the control room, I locked the door and collapsed into the chair, trying to catch my breath. But on the monitor, the North Wing's camera still showed the figures crawling toward it, staring directly into the lens, as if they knew I was watching. Suddenly, the lights started flickering, and the radio in my pocket began to crackle. When the static stopped, a single word came through. "Mark." My name, in a whisper that sounded like it was coming from inside my head. The door began shaking violently, as if someone, or something, was trying to break in. I closed my eyes and waited. I waited for the worst. Then out of nowhere, it all stopped. The radio, the lights, the pounding on the door, complete silence. I slowly opened my eyes and everything seemed normal again. I ran to the reception area, found the other nurse on duty, and told him I wasn't feeling well. I left the hospital that night and never went back. The hospital was shut down not long after, but to this day, whenever I pass by that building, I feel like she's still there, waiting. And somehow I know she still remembers my name.
Story 3, Room 19.
My name is Mike, and I live in Richmond, Virginia. I work as an assistant nurse at a psychiatric hospital that's been around for decades. It's a massive building with long, dimly lit hallways that make it feel like you're stepping back in time. The place always gave me a weird feeling, but you get used to it after a while. Nothing, though, could have prepared me for what happened one night during my shift. It was around 3 in the morning, when I got a call from the head nurse, Mrs. Wallace. She asked me to check on room 19. That's the isolation room, where we keep the patients who pose the greatest risk to themselves or others. I've always hated going there. It has this heavy atmosphere, like the air itself is pressing down on you. That night, room 19 was occupied by Mr. Thompson. He had been admitted a few weeks earlier after a violent outburst at home. He was known for talking to people who weren't there, having terrifying hallucinations, and even trying to hurt himself. Every time I walked past his room, I felt his eyes follow me, even when I knew he wasn't looking. I opened the door and found him sitting in the corner, staring at the wall. The lights were flickering, something that happened often around the hospital. But that night it felt different. With each flicker, I felt like I was losing a part of myself. I called his name. "Mr. Thompson, is everything all right?" He didn't respond. He just sat there, mumbling something under his breath. I moved closer, straining to hear. He was repeating names. John, Sarah, Paul. The names were familiar. They were the names of staff members who had worked the previous shift. It was impossible for him to know, but he was reciting them like he'd known them his whole life. "They're here," he whispered, tilting his head back to look at the ceiling. I followed his gaze and froze. There was a dark patch, almost like a shadow, but it seemed to be moving slowly, expanding and contracting as if it were breathing. My skin went cold. I blinked several times, trying to clear my vision, but the shadow didn't go away. It hung there like it was watching us. I felt an overwhelming urge to run, but I couldn't move. I was stuck, rooted to the floor. And then Mr. Thompson laughed, a dry, hollow laugh that sent shivers down my spine. He pointed at me and, with a voice that didn't sound like his own, said, "They want you too, Mike." I stumbled back, but before I could turn to leave, I felt something grab my arm. It was as if a hand was gripping me, but when I looked down, there was nothing there. Just the cold, crushing pressure that tightened with each passing second. I yanked my arm free, my heart racing, and looked back at Mr. Thompson. He was standing now, much closer than before, his eyes fixed on me with that twisted grin that made me feel like I was staring into the face of something inhuman. The lights flickered again and then went out completely. In the pitch black, I heard whispers all around me. Dozens of voices overlapping and echoing, too fast for me to understand. I strained my eyes and, for a moment, I saw them. Shadowy figures surrounding Mr. Thompson, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. They were watching me, waiting. When the lights finally flickered back on, the shadows were gone. Mr. Thompson had returned to his spot in the corner, looking down at his hands as if nothing had happened. I took a deep breath and turned to leave, but then he looked up. His eyes were filled with a cold, unsettling calm, and he spoke in a voice that I'll never forget. "The show's just getting started, Mike." I bolted out of the room and headed straight for the nurse's station. Mrs. Wallace was there, and I told her everything. She just nodded slowly, as if it was nothing new, and said, "We've all been there. It's just part of working here." Part of working here? What I saw couldn't be normal. I asked if I could leave early, and she agreed. I didn't waste a second. I grabbed my things and left the hospital as fast as I could, promising myself I'd never go back. But that wasn't the end of it. Ever since that night, I've felt different. I catch glimpses of shadows out of the corner of my eye, and sometimes when I'm alone, I hear the same whispers I heard in room 19. It's like something followed me home, and each night when I turn off the lights, I see those same glowing eyes in the darkness, watching, waiting. It's only a matter of time before they show themselves again, and I find out what they really want.